Winston S. Churchill, The World Crisis, Volume 3, Appendix M, Munitions Minutes and Letters. To Sir Douglas Haig, July 26, 1917. I take this early opportunity of writing to you to tell you how earnestly I shall endeavor to study your wishes and sustain the efforts of the Army by every means which falls within the scope of the Ministry of Munitions. I hope you will rely upon me to do this, and will let me know at once if there is any way in which I can serve you. There are many difficulties here, both with labor and materials, especially steel, and at this stage of the war it will often become necessary to choose between desirable things and to throw special emphasis on this or on that branch of production. If you have any suggestions which will improve the liaison which should be maintained between certain branches of this department and the Army, you will, I hope, let me know them. Later on, when I am better informed and you are less busy, it would be a good thing for us to have a talk in order that I may carry out the general directions with regard to supply which I receive from the War Office with a complete and sympathetic understanding of your needs and wishes. I was tempted to tell you when we met what was in store for me, but I thought, on the whole, it was better to wait for the fait accompli. Admiralty Steel Requirements. To Lord Curzon, July 26, 1917. I send you herewith an early copy of the memorandum which has been prepared on the steel question in this department. I am sorry that I shall not be able to be with you on Friday afternoon, but I feel I ought to go to Dundee tonight and give personal attention to the contest on Friday and Saturday. I think you will feel that the position disclosed in the steel papers is fairly conclusive against the possibility of giving full and immediate effect to the new Admiralty demand. On my return I will make a further effort to overcome the difficulties and see if better proposals can be put forward. But, broadly speaking, I hope you will decide to remit the general question of principle to the further consideration of the War Cabinet, having regard to the facts which are now disclosed. It is worth noting, by the way, that the July import of ore is now estimated at 550,000 tons, or nearly 200,000 tons drop on the corresponding month of last year. Do you not think also that the Admiralty use of steel for other purposes than merchant shipbuilding requires to be reviewed? For instance, we started the war with a fairly good supply of ammunition for every class of gun, having regard to the character of the sea battles. During the 3 years that have followed, we have been enormously increasing our stocks, and apart from practice ammunition, have been firing very little away. In my time the advance was very great, and standing orders were given as to production, which I know Balfour long kept in operation. The reserves now accumulated will be found to be out of all proportion to what would be necessary to sink the German fleet even under the most unfavorable circumstances. The American Navy has come in, etc., yet you will see that the Admiralty demands for shell steel are increasing month by month. Again, an important proportion of the steel involved in the enlarged Admiralty demand is no doubt for the construction of destroyers for anti-submarine warfare. Here it is important to ask what kind of destroyer is being built for this purpose. The 1912-13 destroyer, for which I was responsible, lifted 6 or 7 knots on its predecessor, attaining the immense speed of 36 or 37 knots without sacrifice either of gunpowder or sea-keeping capacity. These boats, which are almost miniature cruisers, were designed to catch and hunt down the best destroyers of the German Navy in their own waters across the broad distances of the North Sea. It is obvious that quite a different class of destroyer, much smaller and more humdrum, is required for submarine hunting far out of reach of all German surface ships. 25 knots, for instance, with all the economies in money and material that follow from a sacrifice of speed, would be quite sufficient for such a purpose. Yet, if I am rightly informed, we continue to reproduce the highest type, although the war object for which it was created has been largely rejected. It would be easy to add to these examples, but I only mention these two in the hope that this aspect of our steel expenditure will not be lost sight of when it comes to adjudicating with inevitable severity between the competing claims of various services. Munitions communications with the United States. To Mr. Balfour, Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs. August 2, 1917. During the last few days I have been thinking about the proper organization of our non-diplomatic communications with America, which, as you know, are being considered in several aspects at the present time. There seem to me to be three distinct stages. 1. The Inter-Allied Council called for by Mr. McAdoo to settle a united demand on America on the basis of shipping and credit and to divide up the total agreed upon between the respective allies. This is already well on the road. 2. The organization within each British department for the detailed formulation of their needs and for the day-to-day conduct of their business with America. At present, a variety of persons communicate through various channels with their agents and opposite numbers in America. This cannot be a good way of carrying on business, and must lead to gaps, contradictions, and overlapping. I am arranging that all communications for America from this office are collated and dispatched by one man with a proper staff. 3. The inter-departmental organization on this side of the business communications with America from the various departments. This is also en train, and I attach the proposals which have been prepared here by my directions in response to the request of the Prime Minister for the creation of what is called an American Board. It is undoubtedly necessary that such coordinating machinery should exist, and it ought to be possible to create it and set it in motion without either interfering with the departmental responsibility and initiative or introducing a new element of delay. You will see that we proposed in the beginning that the American Board should only have copies of the cables which are passing, but that, as they go into their stride, they should take over the whole business of their dispatch. If this threefold organization is established, all our business communications with the United States will pass through one transmission point on this side, and will be received at the same point for distribution to the various departments. But do you not think that there should also be one transmission point and address on the other side? Ought not the Northcliffe mission to be organized as a regular department, and all communications, for whomever intended, be addressed to the secretary of that department for distribution under the authority of the head of the mission to the various agents and persons affected, and for collateral information? I should be quite prepared to place all our business agents in America directly under Lord Northcliffe in exactly the same way as departmental officers are under a minister here. Although this system looks a little cumbrous, I do not see how any of the stages can be omitted. A strict routine may here and there cause some inconveniences, but these are not comparable to those which arise when a considerable number of persons, push ahead cheerily on their own affairs without knowledge of what others are doing or concert with them. To the Advisory Committee, Mr. Hunter, August 9, 1917. Monsieur Thomas, in his interview with me yesterday, informed me that there was no less than 700,000 tons of steel, which had been paid for by the French, lying stranded for want of shipment in America. Surely the lifting of this steel, whether to France or to this country, should be a first charge on our shipping resources. I presume the ships which carry ore from northern Spain would not be capable of carrying steel across the Atlantic. But it seems the poorest economy of tonnage, labor and dollars not to transport this vital commodity to Europe. If you are in agreement with this, you should state a strong case for the shipping controller and for the information of the Admiralty and the War Cabinet. It also seems very probable to me that the best plan we could make for the utilization of our resources in the new program of 1918 would include the carrying of all this steel to France and Great Britain as one of its fundamental features. Reserves of guns. To Secretary, Mr. Leighton for Action, Advisory Committee for Information, and Sir Glyn West. August 15, 1917. Pray consider the following in regard to the reserve of guns. In a small army engaged in what is believed to be a short period of intense war, as was our original expeditionary force, a reserve of guns was rightly provided and kept idle on the communications in order to replace gun casualties and losses in batteries. But now that the war is maintained on the front of very large armies, only fractions of which are heavily engaged at any given time, and when it is carried on continually year after year as a regular business, no reserve of idle guns is needed. The ultimate gun reserve of the army should be a repairing organization in the highest state of activity and on the greatest scale. The emergency reserve of guns consists in putting a greater strain upon the lives of the existing guns through keeping them in the line for short periods after they should normally be withdrawn. From this it would appear that the reserve of guns to be provided in the program of 1918 should not be taken as an arbitrary figure like 25%, but should be that figure which is required to flush and feed the repairing organization to its utmost capacity. Let me see calculations worked out on this later basis. The experience of the present offensive should yield the data and the program of guns in the field, and their ammunition provided at present for 1918 should give the scale. The new program. To Secretary, Advisory Committee on New Program, and Mr. Leighton. We must now be asking ourselves the question, in what direction are great expansions of our war-making machinery possible in 1918? Artillery will remain a fairly constant factor, and the steel situation must exercise its limiting power. Ought we not then to look to a gigantic expansion of trench mortars and their organization to pitch as high as that now attained by our artillery? Would it not be possible for the trench mortars properly concerted to take the whole trench-pounding business off the hands of the artillery and leave them free for attacking lines in rear, for counter-battery work and all services of maneuver? Could we not greatly increase our supply of explosives? Have we not already got large surplus and expensive power in this field? Could we not use cast iron carcasses to pass these explosives over to the enemy? I am imagining an expansion in short-range artillery 10 or even 20 times as great as anything yet witnessed, and the whole organized by telephone etc. to the same high standard of action as our present artillery. You should look into this field from the point of view of materials available. Side by side with this short-range artillery, we must explore the provision of very long-range guns and long-range howitzers. I have asked Sir Glyn West to report upon the possibilities of utilizing old naval guns which may be placed at our disposal. There must be at least 80 12-inch and perhaps 29.2-inch guns available from ships which have been or will be laid up almost immediately. To make these guns effective for land service, railway mountings or other carriages will be necessary. Which are the best patterns? How long would they take? What would be saved in time by adapting naval guns to land service as against building guns specially? Secondly, assuming there were a saving of time in utilizing existing naval guns, could the ammunition for these guns be got ready so as to make a saving of time effective? Thirdly, what can be done to prolong the life of those guns? A. By reducing the charges and working out new range tables accordingly. B. By providing new A-tubes. Is it not possible to devise and organize rapid relining plants? Would it not be possible to put a tube like a Morris tube in a 12-inch gun and make it fire a 9-inch or 10-inch shell and to arrange for the rapid replacement of such tubes? This, after all, is only applying the subcaliber principle to actual service. We ought not to be prepared to take no for an answer on this question of extending the firing capacity of long-range guns. The reason that their lives are short is that the inner tube wears out. That is the difficulty which has to be got over. And is it not the obvious solution to have light, rapidly replaceable inner tubes? It is for invention to solve this difficulty. The above is without prejudice to the development of long-range 6-inch gunfire. The development of aeroplanes is now clearly before us as a great expansive feature of the campaign of 1918, and preparations to that end are far advanced. Are we sure they are thoroughly concerted between all departments concerned? Is the bombing program keeping pace with aeroplane construction and projectile construction? Can our explosive supply stand at once the double increased demand A. of an enormous trench mortar expansion and B. of an enormous aerial bombing program? In my opinion, the manufacture of explosives should be pushed to the extreme limit, this being the governing factor. When this governing factor is ascertained, it will then become incumbent upon us to find means of delivering the explosives to the enemy, and if the existing methods of distribution do not suffice to get rid of the explosives, new methods of conveying them must be developed. Do not let us be worried about having too much explosives on our hands. There is plenty of storage room behind the German lines. I will deal with the tank program, that is, mechanical infantry, on separate papers shortly. The above is only to assist you in your survey of the resources and possibilities, and of course I am very imperfectly informed as to what these may be. The Strike of the Cumberland Miners. To Mr. Layton, August 23, 1917. I want the following facts for my meeting with the Cumberland miners tomorrow. 50,000 tons of iron ore have been lost in consequence of the fortnight's strike and holidays. This 50,000 tons of ore would have made 50,000 tons of steel. How many ships of the Board of Trade standard pattern could have been made from 50,000 tons of steel? How many tons of wheat could those ships have brought to this country in the year 1918? Again, during the last few months, the German submarines have been devoting every effort to sinking iron ore cargo upon the seas, and in the last 2, 3, or 4 months they have succeeded in sinking how many tons? I believe I am right in supposing that the fortnight's cessation of work on the Cumberland field has inflicted more injury on our shipping and food supply next year than all the efforts of the German submarines have been able to inflict in 1, 2, or 3 months, as the case may be. Pray have these figures checked for me by tonight. Manpower and Materials. To the War Cabinet. August 26, 1917. The Ministry of Munitions is affected at every step by the treatment of the manpower problem. The distribution of manpower between the different services can only be settled by the War Cabinet. The War Cabinet cannot decide unless they know the effect of any particular distribution on munitions, agriculture, shipbuilding, etc. It would be easy for me, in conjunction with Sir A. C. Geddes, to afford the Cabinet all the necessary data, and after they had decided, it would be easy for me to agree with Sir A. C. Geddes upon the best way, or the least injurious way, to carry out the decision. But to do this, it is indispensable that I should only have to deal with one authority. If the manpower question is split up among a variety of departments, out of touch or at variance with each other, and each cutting in on the labor market and on labor sentiment at numerous points, a continuance of the present friction, confusion, and inefficiency is certain. The greatest cause of irritation in the labor world at the present time is, in my opinion, the recruiting muddle. The questions which are arising every day among munitions workers can easily be settled between two closely allied departments. They are insoluble under present conditions. I trust that in this war emergency a simple clear-cut policy will be followed. That is, that all material should be supplied by one department and all men by another, and that these two departments shall work in the closest concert. Every divergence from this, however tempting or persuasively argued, can only weaken our war-making capacity. The Aeroplane Program. To the War Cabinet. September 25, 1917. First, there is no reason to suppose that the immense program of aeroplane construction which has been sanctioned cannot be achieved. The estimates of progress have so far been substantially confirmed by results. Second, the aeroplane program will of course be frustrated if its requirements in skilled labor and materials are not met, as they certainly can be met. Still more is this true if the claims of the Admiralty or of the War Office involve large withdrawals of skilled labor from munition supplies. If, for instance, Admiralty requirements are to be accorded super priority or Admiralty priority, without regard either to the effect upon munitions programs or to the possibilities of internal economies in the Admiralty use of their present appropriation, the obvious consequences will follow. The matter is one entirely for the Cabinet, and any decision they may take can be easily given effect to. It must, however, be remembered that a decision to give priority to one class of supply is ipso facto cancelled by a subsequent decision to give priority to another class of supply. It will be no use complaining afterwards when the inevitable consequences of such decisions mature. The Zeppelin program for the Navy is a case in point. It is suggested that all departments engaged in the prosecution of the war should receive an equally searching investigation in order to ascertain the use they are making for effective war purposes of the labor and material at their disposal. It is impossible for any one department to judge the relative importance of its own claims. That can only be done by the War Cabinet as a consequence of their General War Plan for 1918, which is not known to individual departments. Memorandum on Protection from Air Raids, October 5, 1917. First, I have given directions that dugouts and shelters are to be immediately provided under approved schemes in the whole of the munitions factories in the bombing areas. Many private firms have already taken these measures with great advantage. The labor will be found from the people employed in the factories. The work should not take long. The loss on output must be accepted. It will certainly be much less than the loss caused by the people scattering to their homes whenever an air raid alarm is given. There will also be a great gain in the feeling of confidence imparted to the workers. I hope these arrangements will be complete within 10 days. Second, I consider that generally speaking people are entitled to a safe shelter within reasonable distance of their homes or their work. I consider that in or near each street a house or houses should be prepared affording reasonable security to the residents, and that in the vicinity of all large works, whether munitions or other, inadequate provision should be made for everyone. This, of course, would vary in each case with the facilities and materials available. I am impressed by the rapidity by which shelters have been provided in some of the munitions areas already, and I do not believe that the task will be found a very formidable one. I expect the Germans are already hard at work providing proper shelters in the cities likely to be attacked. It is especially important to the confidence of the population that in working-class areas, consisting almost entirely of frail two-story dwellings, there should be sufficient shelters prepared. Where there are larger houses, an issue of sandbags and of leaflets containing clear printed directions as to the parts of the house which are safe, the dangers to be avoided, etc., should meet the case. I do not see why the work should not be done by volunteers working under the local authorities, assisted by the military forces in the country. There are scores of ways of giving efficient protection. There are thousands of officers and others in this country thoroughly acquainted with the methods. As long as people have a safe place to go to when firing begins and are compensated for the damage done to their houses, they will stand a great deal of hammering and get back to their work promptly when it stops. All the defenses can be improved gradually. Chemical Warfare Supplies to Secretary, October 16, 1917. What are the factors which impose limits on the chemical supply? How much labor and of what classes is now engaged in the existing chemical supply? How quickly and to what extent could it be increased? I am anxious to consider the possibility of a supply on the largest possible scale of cast iron chemical shells to all or almost all natures of guns to be fired with reduced charges so as not to affect the lives of the guns and so to be a definite addition to the offensive power of our artillery. At present we are limited by steel and the lives of guns. If we can devise a type of ammunition which affects the lives of guns to a far less degree than ordinary shell and does not require steel, we shall have entered a new field of expansion, which expansion should only be limited by the labor involved and by the special materials required in chemical manufacture. Both in the case of high explosives and lethal chemicals, we must push our production to the maximum and devise methods of conveying it to the enemy. I have derived the impression that we are so far only trifling with chemical warfare, and that we have got to prepare ourselves for action on an entirely different scale. I look to General Toullier, in the first instance, to make proposals for very great increases. And it will then be possible to see how far these plans can be reconciled with other needs. Chemical warfare must be one of the 3 or 4 leading features of our campaign of 1918. Higher ceilings. To Sir William Ware. October 24, 1917. A dangerous feature in the last Zeppelin raid has been masked by the disaster which overcame the raiders on their way back. It is clear that the German counted on the height at which the Zeppelins of the newest pattern can now fly as a means of resisting all forms of existing aeroplane attack. Apparently, this calculation is at present well-founded. If that is so, we ought to find without delay a means of sending aeroplanes up to even greater heights at night. I presume this point is being studied. Evidently they thought they could fly here with safety and certainty at altitudes where they could not be touched. It appears to be very important that experimental work to secure greater height records in aeroplanes should be pressed on.